Hello, and welcome to our Leadership in this COVID-19 Era webinar. I'm your host, Eric Benshoff, Director of Leadership Development at TEKsystems, and I am truly delighted to have Dr. Johnathan Haidt with us for a discussion. Now, Dr. Haidt is a social psychologist, a professor of ethical leadership at NYU Stern School of Business, and an author of 3 books that have had tremendous impact on my own growth and development, my own philosophy, both personally and professionally. I had a chance yesterday to connect with John and tell him in detail how much his work has meant to me, but also many of his concepts that John, that you popularized, have been also integrated into our leadership programs. Concepts such as anti-fragility, moral foundations theory, CBT, cognitive distortions, our shared common humanity, and the concept of the elephant and the rider are familiar to a lot of our people here at TEKsystems who've been part of our programs. Dr. Haidt also co-founded openmind.org along with Caroline Mell 4 years ago. We've been partnering with Open Mind now for 2 years in our Emerge programs, and Open Mind helps foster intellectual humility and mutual understanding. It's been a great partnership. It's helped our people be better versions of themselves and made our company better. It's also provided this moment where we can chat with Dr. Haidt on his research through the lens of this COVID-19 moment that we all find ourselves in. And our goal today is to have Dr. Haidt share his knowledge, connect that to tech, and hear some thought leadership around what good may come from this moving forward.
We all understand that there is a global crisis, and we all understand that there are possibilities for coming out better. There are possibilities for even thriving. And what I want to do in this introductory time is put 3 ideas out, the kind of an intellectual toolkit that will help our discussion, and that I hope will help all of you at TEKsystems to grow from this crisis. So, so those are the 3 ideas. Now, to begin, I'm going to actually start with 2 open-ended questions. Now, I guess I can't really see all the people on the call or have them vote, so I'm just going to have to ask you to think about this. Everybody watching this, ask yourself the question, is this pandemic among the worst things to have happened to humanity in the last 50 years? Just think yes or no. For most of you, I imagine the answer is yes. It's, there's not a lot of competition. I'm sorry, there's plenty of competition, but man, this one's big. Okay, second question, do you wish it had not happened? If you could wave a magic wand and stop that first viral transmission, wherever it was, from a bat, whatever it was, if you could wave a magic wand so that that never happened, would you do it? Now, I want to begin the talk now with a Chinese folktale, because I think the answer to the second question is, I don't know. And while I'd be very tempted to do it, to wave the magic wand, I would at least do it with a lot of trepidation. And here's why. So many of you have heard this folktale. In ancient China, there was a farmer, man who loved his horses and his son. And one day his prized horse runs away. The neighbors come to console him. Oh, what a tragedy. But he says, is it good luck? Is it bad luck? It's too soon to tell. So a few days later, the wild horse comes back and brings with him 12 wild horses. A great stroke of good fortune. The neighbors come to congratulate him, but he says, is it good luck? Bad luck? It's too soon to tell. So his son is training the wild horses, and he's thrown and a horse falls on him, and his leg is broken and he'll walk with a limp for the rest of his life. And the neighbors come to commiserate, but he says again, is it good luck? Is it bad luck? Too soon to tell. Well, a few months later, there's a war. The king comes to draft all the young men who are able-bodied. His son is not able-bodied, so his son escapes the draft. The war is a disaster. Almost all the boys are killed. The neighbors come to congratulate him on his good luck once again. So my argument is that for the COVID pandemic, it may be the same thing, because we are incredibly vulnerable to a mega catastrophe. So Bill Gates summarized the science in a TED Talk in 2015. We all heard about it. Ed Young in The Atlantic warned us that the next plague is coming and America is not ready. So we were incredibly vulnerable. The COVID virus, the COVID pandemic, is not a black swan. It's not this thing that nobody could have anticipated. We knew it was coming. We just didn't know when, but we knew it was coming. And we didn't do anything because democracies are really bad at planning for the future. By their very nature, politicians respond to the demands of the moment, and the people want flood relief if their home is flooded, but they don't want to spend a lot of money on the off chance that maybe there will be a flood in 10 years. So democracies are terrible at preparing for big risks that we know are coming. But it's worse than that. The scariest talk I've ever seen was at TED 2019 when Rob Reed showed us what's going to happen as we advance in synthetic biology. And by the 2030s, anybody with an undergrad degree in biology will be able to type out the DNA sequence, plug it into a virus, and you've got any virus you want. And since there are a number of men who have tried to kill as many people as they could, Reed asks, what if these men, they're always men, decide they want to kill everybody? Well, in the 2030s, they'll be able to do it. My point here is that this pandemic is actually a silver lining because we were incredibly vulnerable to a mega catastrophe and even extinction. But those outcomes are much less likely today than they were 3 months ago. Because, boy, are we learning. As Bill Gates said in The Atlantic just yesterday, the coronavirus will hasten big medical breakthroughs, and that's just the beginning. And so we might even think about this as though the virus itself, the coronavirus, is an inoculation for humanity against a future viral disease that's going to be much worse, and not just viral diseases, but other global threats, including global warming and many other problems. So, to return to these questions, is this among the worst things to have happened? Well, in terms of suffering, dislocation, yes. But do you wish it had not happened? Well, we don't know. It's too soon to tell. You've all heard the saying, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger, from Friedrich Nietzsche. Every culture has realized this. This is from Mencius or Mengzi. When heaven is about to confer a great responsibility on any man, it will exercise his mind with suffering, subject his sinews and bones to hard work, and place obstacles in the paths of his deeds so as to stimulate his mind, harden his nature, and improve wherever he is incompetent. The reason this is true is that there are certain systems in this world that are anti-fragile. So if something is fragile, like a wine glass, we don't let kids play with it. If they drop it, it breaks. Bad news. So we give them plastic. Plastic is resilient, like a sippy cup. But if a kid drops a sippy cup, it doesn't get better. It just doesn't get worse. And Nassim Taleb, the guy who wrote The Black Swan, was interested in what are the properties of these systems, these very important systems that actually need setbacks, attacks, failure in order to grow strong. And there's no word in the English language, so he made up the word anti-fragile. The best example of all is the immune system. It's the ultimate anti-fragile system because it requires exposure to all sorts of things in our world to be able to learn what is normal, what's not. It turns out the reason why peanut allergies are going up in America and in other countries that tell pregnant women to avoid peanuts is because we tell pregnant women to avoid peanuts. The immune system actually needs exposure to normal foods to learn, okay, friend or foe, friend or foe. And once we started protecting kids from peanuts, peanut allergy rates skyrocketed. Case number two, immunization. Everyone is now very familiar with the mechanics of immunization. And there's an interesting twist on it. It turns out, now that it's looking like there may be vast numbers of people who didn't really have symptoms, because if you get a very low viral dose, the virus is doubling and doubling, but your immune system can beat it. Your immune system develops antibodies faster if you get a small dose. So a tiny dose actually may be good for you. It rarely makes you sick. But like many of our healthcare workers, if you're breathing in a lot of those droplets, the virus has a head start. Now it can overwhelm you. So once you understand that the immune system is anti-fragile, you can understand why the initial dose of a virus is so crucial for outcomes. Here's another example that you've probably never thought of. Trees, it turns out, are anti-fragile. There was an experiment in the 1990s in the Arizona desert. They created this thing called the biosphere to see if people and plants could live together in a closed system, preparing to go to Mars. Well, there was a problem with the trees. The trees would grow very fast, but then they'd fall over before they reached adulthood. And it turns out the reason is because there was no wind. Trees need wind to blow against them because only from that force does it cause the root system to spread out to compensate for what's needed. And it also creates what they call reaction wood. Interestingly, that's also known as stress wood. Whenever the tree bends in the wind, it puts pressure on certain parts of the wood structure. That tells the cells, grow this extra strong wood because it's needed. Well, what happens? Let's look at our third example, children. So there's an interesting book, Richard Watts, Entitlemania, about what's happening, especially to the children of rich people. And he goes through the research on how palm trees are anti-fragile. Ultimately, they can withstand Category 5 winds. Palm trees evolved in hurricane locations. But then he says, what do parents do? We take our beautiful little palm tree, we pull it indoors, feed it, give it everything it needs to grow. It looks great. And then we roll it out into the wind, and the first breeze that blows, the tree cracks. Boy, did we see this on college campuses beginning in 2014. Suddenly, from out of nowhere in 2014, 2015, all of our mental health centers were flooded, and it keeps rising. We cannot keep up with demand. It's one of the most serious issues on every college campus. Here's the data on that, because it turns out it's not college students, it's all teens. So when millennials were the teenagers back around, say, 2005, 2006, those were the rates of major depression in American teenagers. This is federal data. But all of a sudden, when Gen Z shows up as the teenagers, rates of major depression and anxiety start going up for boys and way up for girls. Now, in my book with Greg Lukianoff, The Coddling of the American Mind, we go into all the evidence we can find on why this is. The timing has something to do with social media. 2012, everyone has just gotten on social media. But the larger effect interacting with social media, we believe, is that we vastly protected Gen Z. That is, kids born around 1996 had very different childhoods from kids born even in 1990. We freaked out about child abduction. We stopped letting kids outside to play in the late 90s. Our parenting got much more paranoid. We were focused on safety. We grossly oversupervised our kids. We were so afraid of stress. We all thought, oh my God, if my kid experiences stress, it could traumatize them, it could damage them. So we protect them from stress, we protect them from risk. Which, as you see from the tree example, is a very bad thing to do. And in turn, our kids have had many fewer experiences. Gen Z is much less likely to have had a summer job, to have gone out on a date, to have gotten a driver's license, to have ever had alcohol, or to have ever had much in the way of autonomy. We basically messed up the attachment system. So all mammals have an attachment system. When we're afraid, we go to mom or an attachment figure. We have a secure base. But the whole point of that is that we then realize, okay, it's safe. Now I go out and play. All mammals play a lot. And that's where the learning happens. We leave our parents' side. We go explore with other kids. We take risks, small risks at first, but then we ramp them up. If kids learn to skateboard, the next thing they do is skateboard downstairs. They're always trying to give themselves the right level of risk. That's where the learning happens, and that's what we started depriving kids of, especially in the 1990s. They are risk deprived, like palm trees raised without wind. So how can you use this? Many of you I know are parents. First, you've got to realize that short-term stress is not bad. It's actually essential. Kids need it. They need a lot of it. It's chronic stress that's bad. If you're anxious for days or weeks, then cortisol damages your brain. But short stress is actually essential. Therefore, give your children a secure base. You definitely want to be loving, make them feel safe at home with you, but don't shelter them from routine stress or from failure or from bad news. I urge you to watch the news with your kids. Let them see that people are dying. Let them see that there are bad things in the world. If you freak out about it, they'll learn to be afraid of that. But if you just watch it and you talk about what's happening, they learn this is what life is, and it's not a reason for me to be afraid. A third lesson, even though we're all cooped up with our kids, you've got to really try to supervise them less. This is a great opportunity, or most of our kids are overscheduled, especially middle class and above. Give them more independence. A good way to do that is go to letgrow.org. It's a wonderful organization um, run by Lenore Skenazy, who wrote Free Range Kids. There's a Let Grow project that guides you through how do you and your kid pick some things that your kid can do, like cooking a meal, doing the laundry, solving problems around the house. And how can you apply anti-fragility as a leader? Well, here's a quote you've probably heard. It seems, as far as I can tell, Nelson Mandela didn't actually say this, but he said things like it, so people have attributed it to him. But it's a great quote. I never lose, I either win or learn. And that's the nature of anti-fragility. So at TEKsystems, it sounds like you are a learning organization. Um, it's essential to talk about anti-fragility. Everybody must know the word. If you don't, if the employees don't know the word anti-fragility, then it might seem as though you're being insensitive if you don't protect them from things. But once everybody understands the importance of learning from adversity and failure, then you can have much more intelligent policies. And I'm not saying just don't protect people and leave them to twist in the breeze. I'm saying make it clear we all know we're all going to make mistakes, and you know what, we have to make mistakes, and the thing is we got to learn from them. So don't hide them. Let's talk about them. That's what they do in medicine after someone dies. That's what they do in the military after an operation. You got to learn from it. Everybody faces the question of how to work with Gen Z, and you know what, nobody knows. They only entered the workforce 2 years ago. A lot of companies tell me they're having difficulty with employees who were born in 1996 and later. They're much more anxious. They're much quicker. Many of them are quicker to take offense because they grew up on social media. So I suggest, I can't prove this, but I suggest that you need to give them a secure base. You need to make them feel safe, make them feel as though their job is secure, make them feel as though you're with them, you're there for them. They're going to actually look to bosses as parental figures more than you might expect. But then talk with them. Gen Z is not in denial. They know that they're fragile. They know that they're anxious. So challenge them to get over it. Challenge them to try graded challenges harder and harder. And many of them will rise to the occasion. That actually is almost something you could hire based on. And finally, trust is gold. A high trust organization is one where when bad times hit, the natural instinct is come together for our mutual safety, to work together as a team. But in an organization where people don't trust leadership, that's not going to happen. So the trust that you build up in good times will make you more likely to grow from bad times. Reappraisal. Chapter 2 of the happiness hypothesis is on this ancient idea. The Stoics were brilliant at it. As Epictetus said, it is not things that disturb us, but our interpretation of their significance. The famous quote from Hamlet, there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. And you find this all over Buddhism and Hinduism. Your own thoughts, once mastered, well, this is the secret to spiritual and psychological growth. Through meditation, you master your thoughts rather than having them jump around like an untamed monkey. So the Buddhists are masters at how do you tame the elephant. If the mind is like a rider on an elephant, conscious reasoning over a much larger unconscious automatic set of processes. Buddhist meditation is a way of training the elephant. Cognitive behavioral therapy is a way designed by Aaron Beck and others. It's easier to learn than meditation, or at least I should say, Westerners tend to have a better success rate with it, but it does some of the same things. And I've recently really come to love this book called The Stoic Challenge by William Irvine. I won't read the quote, but he basically shows us how to live like a Stoic, where when bad things happen, or I should say setbacks happen, if we decide within 5 seconds, if we decide before our emotions take off, we say, okay, here's a challenge. Okay, here's a test. Am I going to rise to it or not? We actually end up growing and thriving and learning from the inevitable problems of life. Now, how exactly do we grow from adversity? Back in the anti-fragile section, I could have put this slide here. Research on post-traumatic growth shows three main mechanisms. First, when bad things happen to us, when we experience major setbacks, we don't die, we do make it through, and therefore we discover that we're stronger than we thought. So our self-concept changes, our relationships often change. We do sometimes lose friends, fair weather friends, but typically other relationships get stronger, people's hearts open. And finally, a very general pattern is that our values and priorities shift. We're not so focused on success in the future. We're focused on connections now, relationships now, people now. We're much more present, and we tend to become more humble and grateful and forgiving. This crisis. This crisis can do a lot of things for us. It can help us reappraise a lot of things. So there's some interesting research showing that as countries get wealthier, they don't actually get happier because our expectations rise faster than wealth. And as the Stoics and Buddhists showed us, we're not reacting to the world as it is, we're reacting to our interpretations. Also, as people become wealthier, they spend more money on comforts. They then get used to them. They take them for granted. And so they don't gain more pleasure. That's known as the hedonic treadmill, like a pleasure treadmill. The more pleasure you get, you kind of expect it and you don't really get anywhere. So a setback like this can help us reset our treadmills. It can certainly destroy any sense of entitlement. It stops us from taking things for granted. So I would invite you all to just think for a moment, what are the things that you really miss? What are the things that you really appreciate? Like when you travel, sometimes you come to appreciate things about your home country. And when you're sick, you come to appreciate simply being able to walk or think because you don't have a fever. What are the things that we've been taking for granted? If you live in a city, maybe even going to a park, seeing our friends, hugging people. I think we're all going to experience a reset and appreciate the simple pleasures of life a lot more when these lockdowns end. And a final point is that a crisis like this can improve our life narratives. Uh, Early research on happiness, some researchers thought, add up the total amount of happiness, happy moments in a person's life, a person with more moments had a happier life. Well, psychologists quickly got past that because a good life, a life that we want to live, is not just lots of happy moments. We all we all write stories about our lives. We have an understanding of who we are, where we came from, where we're going. We have a subjective narrative, a life narrative, and all of our life narratives just opened a new chapter. It's going to be written into all of our narratives. And if you think about the narratives of baby boomers and those who are elderly now, America in particular had an amazing 20th century, and people got wealthier. Those generations built up a lot of wealth, a lot of success, and now a lot of their stories are ending in tragedy. This is the final act for many people, and to see these great stories, personal and national, end like this is what researchers call a spoilage story. Gen Z and the millennials are going to really suffer from this materially. Their lifelong earnings are going to be impacted by this. But as a small compensation, at least, they may well end up with the best narratives. A story that starts with hardship and overcomes it is a much more satisfying life than one that starts with success and ends in failure. So, how can you apply this? This crisis is the best chance you may have to reset and reappraise. I strongly advise people to keep a gratitude journal. I'm not a very grateful person by nature, but I've been using it's called the 5-minute journal. It was recommended to me by others who teach positive psychology. So the 5-minute journal, you can get it as an app as well, and it guides you through gratitude exercises and then reflections on what went well for your day. So it uses well-known techniques in positive psychology. Also, research shows that people who are optimists tend to grow from adversity the best. People who are pessimistic or anxious are less likely to grow from adversity. So if you are prone to anxiety, now would be a really, really good time to work on it, especially by learning cognitive behavioral therapy. And there are a lot of ways you can do that or learn that online. What makes us happy? In my book, there are 3 hypotheses. The first is that happiness comes from outside. It comes from getting what you want. Being king would be good. But think about this amazing passage from the book of Ecclesiastes, spoken by a man who was king in Jerusalem. He says, I made great works. I also gathered for myself silver and gold, the treasure of kings, delights of the flesh, many concubines. I became great and surpassed all who were before me. But then he says, when I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had spent in doing it, again, all was vanity and a chasing after wind. So material success can leave us empty. It turns out it's not really achieving our goals that makes us happy. It's making progress towards our goals tends to do a lot more. A second hypothesis is that happiness doesn't come from outside, it comes from within. And this is what the Stoics and the Buddhists have always told us to do. Do not seek to have events happen as you want them to, but instead want them to happen as they do, and your life will go well. So don't try to change the world, change yourself. Now that's better advice. But it turns out that there are actually some things that you should strive for, especially as a modern Westerner. So when Sigmund Freud was asked about what is mental health, he said, Leben und Arbeiten, which is German for love and work. And those two criteria have long stood as the test of mental health. If a person is blocked or unable to develop loving relationships or be effective and productive in work, we consider them usually to have some sort of a mental health problem. I would just add to that that more recent research in positive psychology shows the importance of having a sense of meaning and purpose. So if you put this all together, the final version of the happiness hypothesis is that happiness comes from between. That is, it comes from getting the right relationships between yourself and others, yourself and your work, and yourself and something larger than yourself. It is worth striving to get those three things. Because people are not machines, we're actually more like plants. And with plants, if you put them in the ground, you get the conditions right, then you just wait. And over time, it grows, it flourishes. So, happiness during the pandemic. I would urge you to do a kind of a between audit for yourself, for your children, your parents, your employees. Look at these three factors. How are people doing? How do we maintain love and relationships in a time of social distancing? So I would strongly urge emphasizing synchronous relationships. I think we're all overwhelmed with email. People who are on Instagram or Facebook are overwhelmed with posts and things they have to like and comment on. I think a lot of people find that not very satisfying. But I think a lot of us are finding that face to face, I mean, Zoom can be exhausting after a while, but man, is it better than communicating by email or Instagram or something like that. So especially favor for yourself and your kids synchronous face-to-face communication. As I said before, this is a very good time to keep a gratitude journal and write letters to people from your past, teachers, friends, parents, who made a difference in your life. That has been shown to increase happiness. On work, focus on making progress. A lot of us are going to be blocked from achieving our goals, but this is a great time to build skills, to learn techniques, to sharpen the saw, as they say. Especially work on yourself, work on your own habits like a morning routine, whether it's meditation, exercise, something to make yourself more productive. That's progress. And finally, to the extent that you can be part of something larger than yourself, whether it's a religious community, a pro-social cause, any kind of mission, and that can come through work, use this time to reappraise your values, to see the bigger picture, and seek out some way that you can be part of something larger, part of some team, some noble group doing something of value. So those are my suggestions for how you can help yourself and others retain and even grow in well-being during the pandemic. So in conclusion, I offered three psychological ideas. My goal was to show how to apply them at three levels. I focused on the individual level in this short talk, and we talked briefly about the organization. I assume we'll do more of that in conversation in a moment. And in conclusion, it is possible to thrive in the COVID and post-COVID world. This image actually shows pollution levels and nitrous oxide levels dropping over Europe to end with just one more silver lining. Thanks very much.
Here at TEKsystems, we have a large percentage of our employees that range in age from early 20s to early 30s, and we talked a little bit about how many people we hire every year right out of college. what should we be contemplating relative to the potential impact this pandemic is going to have on the mindsets of our 20 and 30 somethings that are being shaped by this, in addition to everything that was shaping that generation? Is there anything we should be worried about getting wrong as we try to safely transition into whatever the new normal is going to be? Oh, you're on mute, John. John, you're on mute.
Huh. Okay.
There you
Oh,
go.
strange. I guess when I stop sharing my screen, it automatically. All right. So that's a question that every company needs to ask, and especially as I learned that you hire so many people fresh out of college. So the first thing is we've all been learning about the millennials over the last 10 or 15 years, and they're different from Gen X. And every generation thinks the one behind it is soft and silly and all that. That's always been the case. Um, uh, but don't expect that Gen Z is going to be like the millennials. That would be the first mistake you can make. So kids born in 1996, it's very surprising how sharp the cutoff is. I'm not saying it's literally 1 year, but over a several year period, childhood changed, and that's due to both the overprotection and the everybody got on social media between 2009 and 2012. And for middle school kids, I think, I can't prove this, but the effects were huge, especially on middle school girls. Um, so don't expect that everything you've learned about the millennials will translate to Gen Z. Gen Z is much more anxious. They're much more pragmatic. They are idealistic. They want work to align with their values. But the millennials, I think, had more of an emphasis on lifestyle, on quality of life, and they had the luxury. They didn't always have good job markets, but for much of their lives, they had the option of, well, I'll leave this company, I'll go there, and so they would seem to flit around a lot. We don't know if that's going to be true for Gen Z. Gen Z might be much more willing to stay if you treat them well, if they feel safe in the company. They might be much more willing to stay. So that's the first thing: is the generations are likely to be very different. Secondly, the pandemic is likely to affect the generations differently. Um, and we don't know how it's going to probably interact also with mental health status. So those who are prone to anxiety, many of them may get worse. Many of them may find their symptoms exacerbated. But others who have an attitude of self-improvement, who have an attitude of working on it, can overcome it. So I think you might want to look for people who have very much an attitude of self-improvement, who are ambitious, not necessarily just ambitious like I want to make as much money as possible, but you know, I know that I've been overprotected. I want to break out of my shell. I want to grow. I want to learn from you. I want to grow in this job. If you find young people like that, and then you treat them well, make them feel secure, but give them those chances to leave the comfort zone, that would be my advice.
You discussed anti-fragility, the idea that what doesn't kill you actually makes you stronger. Where do you anticipate we cultivate anti-fragility as companies, individuals, and a country coming out of COVID-19? And what might get in the way of that?
Yeah, I think it's going to be, the basic idea of anti-fragility it applies at all levels. Um, as individuals, we know the deep psychology through the attachment system, through anxiety, through appraisal. So there's a set of mechanisms we understand pretty well there. And there it's especially important that we change the way we're raising kids because you can still improve in your 20s and 30s, but there's the real sensitive period is late childhood, middle school, elementary, middle school, through high school. We've got to stop overprotecting kids there. That's the biggest bang for the buck. Now, when we turn to organizations, it's more complicated because an organization is not just a person scaled up. Um, so I think this is well, American capitalism has been moving in a certain way towards what's called cutthroat capitalism. In Europe, they have what's called cuddly capitalism, more job protection. It's less dynamic. Our form is more dynamic, but less humane. Um, let's see, which one will, well, I think cutthroat capitalism is more vulnerable to real harm when things go wrong. We don't allow slack in the system. We don't have redundancies. So I think we're hit really hard. We might have some trouble recovering here. Um, Companies, of course, should plan more for rainy days, and companies are likely to do that for a few years. But then, if good times go for a while, the most efficient companies win. So, far-sighted companies are going to plan more for the future, but it's going to really help if we have structural or legal changes that encourage that. Um, so I think we're going to have to really think about risk management as a country, and that's really a job of the federal government. In terms of the country, ooh, that's one where we most need it. We most need a reset. We're in very bad shape. Our democracy, by objective measures, by all kinds of ratings, our democracy, which used to be the envy of the world, so many countries literally copied our constitution thinking they could get what we had in the 20th century. And now we're kind of a laughing stock, and we have stopped. We're no longer the global leaders in this crisis. So our country's in big trouble. Um, and our leadership, in many cases, is exacerbating that, polarizing it. I was hopeful at the beginning of this that this would be a big reset for America, but now that whether you're on the left or the right, whether you take the crisis, the virus seriously and believe we should have lockdowns or not, is now a marker of what side you're on, which is tragic, which is a real tragedy for this country. So our odds of coming out of this better are diminished in the last few weeks, I would say. But we are seeing at the local level and in companies, we are seeing, I think, overwhelmingly pro-social attitudes, more people wanting to help each other. So I think the American people and a lot of our organizations and a lot of our states are coming together in positive ways. So I don't know what to predict here. Being attacked from an outside power really pulls people together. Pandemics actually often make people afraid of each other. So it's not clear whether America is going to come out of this stronger or weaker.
What's the best way to honor or balance honest conversations around the truth of our current uncertainties while also handling immediate anxiety and worries around the fear, the potential life and death situations, but also wanting to focus on what you talked about, these coping skills that we have an opportunity to hone in our, not only our children, but the people that we're leading as well?
Yeah. Well, I think I can talk about children with more confidence. Um, Children are much tougher than we think. Um, I think I'm guessing that a lot of parents have the expectation I did that when terrible things happen, whether it's the Newtown shootings or any national tragedy, we're all flooded with like, how to talk to your child about this, and maybe it's going to freak them out, and it never does. That is, our guess about what they're like is usually wrong. And you can talk to kids about almost any terrible tragedy, and they're looking more to you. If you freak out about it, then they might get anxious. But if you just talk with them, and so that's why, again, I've always made it a point to watch the news with my kids, even when they show dead bodies. Death used to be a part of life all over the world. People actually saw dead bodies, not anymore. As we clear bad things out of their experience. In fact, my daughter, my 10-year-old daughter, said to me the other day, Daddy, a lot of these old nursery rhymes, they have all sorts of bad stuff in them. You know, like, Rockabye Baby, the cradle will fall, and, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. And I realized, oh my God, death used to be a part of life, and kids can handle a nursery rhyme about death. We think they'll freak out, but they don't. And we've scrubbed their childhood clean of anything that might be upsetting. And guess what?
Sanitize
Rising
it.
anxiety disorders. So, with your children, unless your kid has a specific anxiety disorder, then the advice might be different. But otherwise, give them lots of stress and challenges, and you model calmness. Now, for companies, that's tricky because it's going to depend a lot on the internal culture and the situation. And if there's high trust, there can be high honesty. And if there's not high trust, then this is a time to build more trust. And leadership and what the most important thing we is we evolved to be able to do one for all for one. We're great at that, but we're also very good at being selfish. And so if leadership is in the trenches, if leadership takes a hit, if leaders forego their bonuses, take a pay cut, do everything that show that it's one for all for one. If you stood by us beforehand, we'll stand by you now. At least it may be, for many companies, that's going to be financially impossible to do. But to the extent that they're trying, to the extent that there's shared sacrifice, then I think they can come out of this much stronger. Remember that companies have narratives too. And what the way leaders react during this crisis is going to be the most important chapter in the narrative of most companies for the next 5 or 10 years. So don't just look at the short-term financials. really think about what's the story of this company going to be.
Hey, John. I got a question going back to parenting a little bit. In one of your books, you mentioned that screen time is very much connected to anxiety and depression. And you also talked about the fact that after 2 hours of screen time, the risks grow with each additional hour on top of that 2 hours. And then another statistic that you pointed out, I think, as you spoke today, and also in one of your books, is the fact that women in college who now feel that they have a psychological disorder has gone from 1 in 18 college women to now 1 in 7 college women.
And it's up since then. It's now 1 in 5, yeah.
Yeah, pretty scary to me. And I have 5 girls, 2 boys and 5 girls, and I see that anxiety. We're dealing with it with a couple of them, and we're dealing with it with our daughter in college. Can you speak about what to do with some of that? I know, that's a long question, number one. And number two, how is this screen time affecting adults in the workplace, adults in general? Do you see that same increase in depression and anxiety with adults?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for the opportunity to address that. So what we reported in the book, so we finished writing the book in early 2018. And so the correlational studies are, as you say, that when this is work on teenagers especially, that beyond 2 or 3 hours a week, the curves start rising. 1 or 2 hours a week, there's no sign of harm. But when you get to 3 or 4 hours of screen time a day, the rates do rise. But later research shows that it's not screen time per se. It turns out if you look at all screens, including television, including talking with your friends on the phone, a lot of it is actually healthy. So there's nothing magical about a screen. Since the book came out, we've drilled down into the data, and what we find is that it's social media for girls. Let me repeat that. It's not screen time, it's social media for girls. That finding is very reliable. It's a much bigger effect than anything else. It survives all kinds of statistical controls. Experiments also show, we found 10 experiments that ask people to get off of social media. 8 of them find a significant effect on well-being. So screen time, I'm not saying your kids can spend 10 hours a day on screens normally, because screens do have an opportunity cost. If your kid is playing video games 8 hours a day, then they're not doing anything else. Right now during lockdown, what else would they be doing? So I'm not saying 8 hours a day is okay, but I actually bought my son an Xbox. He's 13. I bought him an Xbox just before this all hit because we could see what was coming. And this way he plays with his friends. Now, if we let him, he'd probably play 6 or 8 hours a day, but 3 or 4 hours a day is fine. I will not let my daughter, who's 10, onto Instagram until she's in high school. So just focus, if you've got daughters, focus on social media, but also talk to them about it. Some people might benefit from social media, but overall, that probably is a big net negative, especially for girls.
So, John, in your first book, The Happiness Hypothesis, you talk about the opportunity in epiphanies, and you just mentioned in your slide deck that there's an opportunity for kind of resetting ourselves right now. You also talk about how fleeting epiphanies generally are. So, knowing what you know about tech, where would you advise us to lean in, and what are the potential pitfalls to making the most of these moments organizationally?
Yeah. So an important finding about epiphanies, and this goes back to William James' wonderful book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, is that a lot of people have these transformational experiences. People feel that God has visited them, or they have spontaneous peak experiences, or they have experience with psychedelic drugs, or in therapy, or or in nature, and we feel like, I'm being reborn, and it's a new day, and it's incredibly powerful, positive experiences, and those can actually change you for weeks or months, but they tend to fade unless you maintain them. So in any individual organization, you can have a peak experience, you can have this moment, but if you don't do anything, if you don't change your habits, if you don't do anything to institutionalize it or regularize it, it's likely to fade. Same thing with countries after disasters. After 9/11, there was a period where there was much greater social capital and trust for a variety of reasons. The culture war heated up soon after that, but there was at least a window where there really was more, and great things are possible in that window. Um, so I would say this is the ideal time to to think about the culture that you want, think about the best company you can be, because this is your best chance to change things. And if the change is just top down, it's less likely to stick. But part of this one for all, all for one thing is you have to have the sense of you need leadership. There are some management theories about flat structures and holacracy and things that I don't think work very well. You do need leadership. You need somebody, or a group has to be the decision makers. But people have to feel that they're being heard and that this is a collective effort. And so, so this is definitely a good chance to be reaching out to employees, to be addressing their concerns, but not as like, what's your wish list? What's the food in the cafeteria? More of a sense of, look, we're all in this together. This is a dangerous time. We're going to be losing a lot of business. This is going to be hard. We all got to pull together. Okay, it's like, and it has to be feel mutual. So if you take that attitude and people really feel included and heard, then they're less likely to be selfish and just say, well, I want more for me.
Talked about how this might end up being a kind of inoculation where we are in it together and it serves as a uniting effect, reducing the polarization in our country. You talked a little bit about how maybe over the last couple of weeks that maybe seems a little less likely than it did 2 weeks ago. What can we do as a call to action as individuals and as in our organization to make that more likely?
Great. Okay, this is a great chance to talk with TEKsystems, given that you've been using Open Mind. So one of the major lessons of the ancients, in fact, if I had more time, I would have made it a whole section of the talk, is that we are
again later.
Okay, we can have a round two. is that we are moralistic hypocrites. In every tradition, they tell us this. So here's the beginning of chapter 4. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but you do not notice the log in your own? Where Buddha says, it's easy to see the faults of others, but difficult to see one's own faults. Same idea. So we're moralistic hypocrites, and we're moralistic hypocrites during a raging culture war. And our culture war is actually preventing us from doing a good job of dealing with the pandemic. And I think what we've done in America should be an embarrassment to America and to democracy. Now, some of the European countries have done a better job. So democracies can handle this, but ours has failed spectacularly. And so I think one of the best things all of us can do, and it sounds like you're actually doing a good job at this at TEKsystems, is deal with the political conflict that's hitting so many organizations. In a lot of tech companies, especially those in the Bay Area, the company culture leans far left and politics is very explicit. And so anyone who's not on the left feels that they're demonized, that they can't say anything. So whether a company leans left or right is not necessarily a problem. But if it leans one way or the other, it's especially important that leadership make it clear we're here to serve our clients. We're not here to fight the culture war. We've got to keep that stuff out. Maybe we can learn to talk about it if we do open mind and take it seriously and treat each other with respect and develop a sense of humility. So I would say that it's incumbent on all of us as Americans, if we want to make our country great again, we've got to get out of this nasty culture war and return to normal politics where we disagree with each other over policies, role of government, all that stuff. That's normal politics. But we stop demonizing the others and seeing them as evil. We realize that we actually need the other side. We learn from each other. So I would say, be the change you want to be, the change you seek.